Let me tell you, dear friends, of the Calusa, the river that runs to the sea. Big Sugar denies that they're polluting the skies and the water that runs free. He used to run clear at surface and beer, hunter and fisherman's dream. Seagrass fled and the wildlife fled, all we can do is drink. Caloosahatchee, how the hell you spell your name? All their green slime is cloud in my mind, I'm too drunk to feel the pain. Well, they cover the backs, the septic tank's cracked, crap flows this way. And Big Sugar denies that they're polluting the skies, death to the Caloosahatchee. So grab your glass, sit on your ass, plug your nose and drink. Yeah, chug your beer before your nasal is clear. You throw it all up in the sink. Caloosahatchee, how the hell you spell your name? All the green slime is clouding my mind, and I'm too drunk to feel the pain. So raise your glass, each lad and lass. Let's toast to the future we seek. Big and Sugar confess they created this mess. Death to the Caloosahatchee. Caloosahatchee, how the hell you spell your name? All the green slime is clouding my mind, and I'm too drunk to feel the pain. Caloosahatchee, how the hell you spell your name? Yeah, 'cause all this green slime is clouding my mind, and I'm too drunk to feel the pain. Yeah, and I'm too drunk to feel the pain. I'm too drunk to feel the pain.
Cha cha cha. Hello, folks. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a nice brisk evening. It feels like fall, uncharacteristically for our region. Everybody's frisky. My horses were jumping around. My dog was playing around in the pasture with the horses. It feels pretty good. So we want to welcome everybody. You just heard Brendan Best. How many of you saw the movie that we did, Troubled Waters? Well, that song may be familiar to you. It's the song that plays under the tail credits of the movie, and it was written by Brendan and his mom CK and his dad Daryl, who can't be with us tonight. And Brendan is presently a captain in the U.S. Air Force. He flew in from Oklahoma to sing that song for you guys. He flies E3 Century planes, so you can talk to him about that job. But we really appreciate your coming in for that, Brendan, and for your service. Thank you, sir. So, I'm Casey Schulberg. I'm Executive Director of Calusa Waterkeeper. Can you hear me? Yep. Great. I want to do a shout out to a couple of people. First to Kathy Cookman, who set up the silent auction for us tonight. I don't know if you've had a gander at the silent auction, but it's quite an array of goodies. And if you have any questions, please go see Kathy. Kathy and John have done a great job setting that up. Kathy, do you want to say anything about it? You good? Here comes Kathy Cookman. She's also a board member of ours and runs Manatee Eco River Tours with her husband, John, Captain John Cookman.
We've tried something new this evening. Put it to my mouth. That was my husband. Now you know what it's like to go on a tour with us. He is a U.S. Coast Guard Master Captain, but I'm the Admiral. Okay. Love you. Okay, so this is all new tonight. It's electronic, and at the top of the paper we have in the corner, there is a text number that you can text your bid to. So all you need are the 3 characters that are associated with the item that you would like to bid on. Add that in with your number, and then you're good to go. And so if you have any questions, come visit. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. I want to recognize, thank you. I want to recognize our board members who are here. Ruth Watkins, our president. Yeah, Ruth. Jim Watkins, our treasurer, board member. Our other board members. Howard Sockman is here. Where's Howard? There's Howard. John Paul is here. Where's John? John Paul somewhere. Yeah. Marty Daltrey is here. Salemi. David Laties. David, who's offered some amazing coins for us in our silent auction. Is Salemi here? Where's Salemi? She was helping us check in at the door. She's here somewhere. Did I miss anyone? Yeah, Howard, you got it. Anyway, we've got a great team, and we're really, really grateful for the support we get from our board. We also have John Cassani. You'll be hearing from him in just a moment. He's an amazing resource for this town and for this community. How many Rangers do we have in the room? Wow. I count about 12 or 15 hands. The Ranger program was started about 2 or 3 years ago by John Cassani, and it basically allows us to amplify our efforts in testing and in advocacy and just in general organization. So we are so grateful to the Rangers and all the work that they do. We couldn't do this without the Rangers. The Rangers rock. So thank you, Rangers. You guys are fabulous. And we just graduated 25 more Rangers on the 5th of November. So we're up to 85 now. It's quite an amazing program. So we got tonight, you know, we're basically an education and advocacy group. You probably know us. If you don't, please come to see us, come meet us, talk to us. But we basically do education and advocacy all year long. So we decided to change things up a little bit and create a kind of celebration of the culture of water, which is the point of this evening. So we've invited some wonderful speakers. We have a little musical entertainment. We've got a couple of surprises for you in store about midway through the show, some music and a silent auction. So, and speaking of the food that we have here, which is open, by the way, and will be open again at intermission, I really want to thank Karen and G3 Catering, because they did us a huge favor. They basically gave us the food for free, and all we're paying for is their staff. So that's a tremendous benefit to us. And we're really, really good. And I don't know if you've sampled the food, but you know, I think it's dynamite. And I hope you enjoy it as well. Also want to thank Mark Sullivan, who runs Legacy Harbor Inn and Suites and a marina right over here, not far away, because he has graciously comped Maggie Herchella's room tonight. So, and often we have asked him if we have outside visitors or dignitaries coming to town, and Mark always steps up. So thank you, Mark. So folks, again, I really, really want to thank you for coming out tonight, and we're gonna get started with our first speaker, who is my friend and my partner, and the real deal here in town. And John has promised us that he will not be talking science tonight. So I'm sorry for those of you who will be disappointed that you're not going to get a lecture about cyanobacteria. But my friend and partner, and a really an amazing resource for this town, John Cassani.
Thanks for coming out tonight. Appreciate the intro, KC. I guess I can move around a little bit. I got a mobile mic here. So, you know, the whole tradition of this culture night started a few years ago at the Nature Center. We had this sort of historical look back. It was a fish fry, and we had a good time at the planetarium. And Ralph Woodring was also here tonight, Amy Williams, and we had the retired outdoor writer from the News Press Byron. So we had a great time. We thought, let's repeat this model again. We really enjoyed getting together, reminiscing and recanting some of our celebrations, accomplishments, maybe even look at a little bit of humor about some of the things that might have happened that didn't. So let's jump right into it. So my story tonight is about 25 years ago at work. I worked out in Buckingham. a retired newspaper reporter came out to work. I didn't know him. Some of you might, and if you do remember this gentleman, please see me afterwards. I'd like to reconnect with him. 25 years ago was a long time. Anyway, he brought me 2 big boxes of newspaper clippings from, I think, the Beat. Some of the news press articles, and I thought, geez, what am I going to do with all these clippings? So for the last 25 years, these have been in my garage, one of 3 garages that survived 3 hurricanes and the floods that went with them. Most of the glossy publications now stick together. And, I never really looked at these too close until yesterday. And I was trying to put together a little thing for this thing tonight, just kind of reminiscing about some of the environmental activities and movements we had over the years. And it turned out it is a gem of information. It represents about 30 years from about 1960 up to about 1985. Almost every bit of environmental news over 25 years is encapsulated in these 2 boxes. And it's in pretty bad shape right now. So we're desperately trying to get this thing digitized, get it into some kind of an archive. That was from one of the boxes. You might recognize Bill Hammond here on one of them. And this is kind of what my work looked like yesterday, trying to figure out what I was going to talk about here tonight. So I'm just going to give you, I guess I have about 8 minutes to tell you about 25 years of environmental victories and this and that over the years. So I'm just going to give you a little flavor for kind of what I found in this collection. It was really amazing. 1965, you may not be aware that there was a little newspaper called the American Eagle. It was all about the wise use of natural resources here in Lee County. It was put on by the Calusa Foundation. 1965 was before the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, wetlands permitting. And at that time, there were this was post-World War II, a lot of interest looking at developing our coastal properties. And here in 1965, they're looking at bulkhead lines around northern Estero Bay.
Much better. Much better.
So that was kind of a bad omen for what might be coming.
Turning the lights on, much better.
Anybody remember this map?
Yeah, I saw it.
There was actually an attempt to put a piling bridge across Estero Bay, across Kansas Pass. This was about 1969, 1970. It's a good thing that thing didn't happen. I found this article. I always talk about growth and why we seem to want growth for just growth's sake. And so here in this 1970 article from the news press, they're exclaiming, oh my God, growth's out of control. The population in Lee County is at 100,000. What is it now? It's between 700,000 and 800,000 now. And the person that saved this article put this last sentence in, but with most communities straining now to accommodate their bulging population, the old-time gospel of growth for growth's sake may be in for some agonizing reappraisal. I mean, was that prophetic or what? 1970. Was that 49 years ago or so? My God. So I have to say there were some very enlightened thinkers in the 1960s. They knew what was coming for coastal Southwest Florida. In 1966, the northern part of Estero Bay was designated as the state's first aquatic preserve. Estero Bay was the state's first aquatic preserve. Oh, but you jump to about 1976, and does anybody remember Robert Troutman and the Estuaries Project? There's a few folks that do. You know what he was trying to do? He was trying to build a community of condominiums to house 73,000 people on Estero Bay. And he wanted to bulldoze 1,800 acres of black mangroves. I'm not making this up. This was a landmark case that went through the courts. It was incredible. They actually wanted to build a waterway that would create navigable water out to the bay from this massive community that was going to house 73,000 people in condominiums on Estero Bay. The county commission turned him down. The state of Florida turned him down. But an appellate court said they had to issue the permit. Okay? Thank goodness that there was opposition at that point. It went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and they overturned the appellate court decision to allow this to go forward. Would have had significant impact, and in the long run, it did create landmark legal precedents for Southwest Florida, for wetlands permitting, for land use, for growth. The developer wasn't going to give up that easy. He actually appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they refused to hear it. This was 1981, wasn't all that long ago. And he finally gave up somewhere along the way towards the end of the 70s here. And we're so glad that happened. The land, 4,700 acres foreclosed to the mortgager. 4,740 acres sold for $1.2 million. That's about $250 an acre on Estero Bay now. What do you think that's worth now? That was July 25th, 1981. So at that time, everybody's going, oh my God, we gotta preserve land. All these citizen initiatives came forward. Do you remember 6 Mile Cypress Slough and the referendum that occurred in 1976? Okay, this was the project that Bill Hammond was hooked up with and got all the Monday Group people behind. And they got it done. They got the people of Lee County to support purchasing all 2,500 acres of 6 Mile Cypress Slough. Yeah. Those are things we want to remember. Those are things we want to celebrate for sure. Matanzas Path Wilderness Preserve. It's not called that now, but here's another citizen initiative. We can't let things like the estuaries happen again. It would have been disastrous. Here's Bill Hammond meeting with kids, trying to drum up support for the Matanzas Wilderness Preserve acquisition. And that's Nat Reed, who passed away recently, Assistant Secretary of the Interior. Bill has his footprints and fingerprints on so many projects in Southwest Florida. He really is a hero in many contexts. Here he is talking to the kids. This is just the tip of the iceberg that was in these 2 boxes that was left at my office door 25 years ago. This was just a gem, and some of these are just starting to deteriorate, so we got to get them digitized. I don't know if you recognize the guy on the right. Does anyone know Kevin Irwin? That's Kevin Irwin in 1976, tramping around one of his assessment projects. Remember we were talking about growth a little earlier, and they thought 100,000 people in Lee County was just sort of like out of control. Well, this jumped to 1980, and this is from a beach, Fort Myers Beach newspaper, saying growth in Lee County, the fastest rate in the nation, should continue. And by God, it did. What brought a lot of that growth? I-75. Did anybody live here before I-75 was built? Yeah, we got a few folks. I remember we used to have to drive up to Arcadia and snake over to State Road 71 and then up to 301 to get to Tampa. A lot of folks didn't remember what it was like, but that brought massive growth. I think I-75 was completed to Lee County in 1983, if I remember correctly. How many lived here on or before 1983? Wow, quite a few actually. So you remember those days. What was the last segment of I-75 that went in 1992? That was the Alligator Alley, the segment that crossed the Big Cypress Preserve, and that was extremely controversial. And I found these series. Does anybody remember the Florida Calamity Calendar series? Nobody. You got to see these things. It was original artwork for each month of the year that kind of poked fun at some of the things that might have happened that didn't. It could have changed the landscape in Southwest Florida. I wish I had more time. This is my last slide. So I just want to say that we have a great lineup tonight. Appreciate, again, coming out, supporting everything we do at Calusa Waterkeeper. So I tried to unpack about 30 years in 7 or 8 minutes. He says, don't take more than 8 minutes. Okay. All right, so our next speaker, bring it on.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I love the fact that so many hands went up in the room of people who were here before 1975. Very impressive. I was here for a year in 1958 in Everglades City. Everglades City, you know, the joke is that Everglades City in 1958 had 350 residents, and today it's mushroomed to 388 citizens. So, but it was a little different back in '58. We are really, really honored to have our next speaker, who was with us for the last Calusa Culture Night, and is such an authority on the Calusa Indians and the Rendell Research Center. So we want to introduce Sidney Berne. Sidney Berne, who's the Director of Programs. Thank you, Richard. She gets special treatment, Cindy. Yeah. All right. Sidney Berne, folks.
Climbing to the summit of the heights of this mound, I was astonished beyond measure with the extent of the works which became visible therefrom to the southwestward. And as far as the eye could see, to the southward stood a succession of these great shell heights with their intermediate watercourts, graded ways, and canals with their shelly surrounding platforms and terraces. And to the southeastward, yet another series of the gigantic heights. Archaeologist Frank Hamilton Cushing penned these words in 1895, standing where once had thrived a great town of the Calusa, and where today is the Rendell Research Center and Calusa Heritage Trail on Pine Island. 95 years later, archaeologists excavated the mound upon which Cushing stood and revealed evidence of a thriving estuary of seagrass meadows, tidal creeks, oyster beds, and mangrove forests where mollusks and fish were plentiful. Bones of pinfish, pigfish, sea trout, sheep's head, black drum, red drum, mullet, and more spoke of abundance through time. They told a story of estuarine and Calusa resilience through the span of time, AD 600 to 1700 AD. Mollusk shells of lightning whelks, tulip snails, crown conch, oyster shells, and more bore further testimony to the estuary as a source of sustenance, tools, power, culture. During the hot, rainy summer of 2015, at the edge of the estuary where Cushing had tread, the Calusa had fished, and on private property immediately adjacent to protected lands, a septic system failed. The hole for the replacement tank, over 8 feet by 10 feet and up to 5 foot deep, would be dug into undisturbed deposits from Calusa time. And thus archaeologists abandoned summer plans to launch an emergency excavation. Nature was not inclined to help. Dr. Karen Walker wrote in her field notes on July 27, 2015, Monday was to be our first day of working with the crew, but beginning before dawn, the rain was constant and at times heavy, and the available forecast was for the same all day long. Believe me, this is not how an excavation at Pineland usually looks. But with heavy equipment waiting, the reality was that only 3 weeks were allowed for a project that should have taken at least 3 months. Reading now excerpts from Karen Walker's journal. Thursday, July 30, 2015. After an uncomfortable start due to sand gnats, the breeze came up and we escaped the rains, giving us a productive day. We excavated with the pump, removing water fast enough to allow us to see what we were excavating, while clear water continued to cascade out and down the profiles of the unit, over the shells, replacing the water that was taken away by the pump. We began also collecting quahog clamshell fragments from the screens for possible radiocarbon dating purposes. Before reaching sterile sand, where evidence of past humans would be absent, an anaerobic area of wet midden was unexpectedly encountered. Astonishingly, wild plant seeds, including saw palmetto and mastic, human-modified pieces of wood, and this piece of cordage with 7 knots were revealed. Unlike the also excavated pottery and shell artifacts, these normally perishable materials would have rapidly decomposed but for the preservation qualities of the persistent oxygen-depleted waters. With heavy equipment waiting in the septic tank and to backfill the hole, reviewing all materials in the field was not possible. A decision was made to bag materials and water, tag them with corresponding location and spatial data, and move the bags to the wet lab for water screening. At the site, as archaeologists reluctantly departed, the machinery was set in motion, the tank placed, the hole filled, and grass sod laid on the surface. After months of tedious work by trained volunteers, the excavated materials were moved to the Florida Museum at Gainesville for analysis and permanent preservation. They were stored in water and are still routinely monitored to ensure preservation. Soon after the materials were moved, the radiocarbon dates from several quahog clams were obtained from the Center for Applied Isotope Studies at the University of Georgia. This ponderous arc shell with corresponding cordage had laid adjacent to those same clams that were radiocarbon dated to AD 985 to 1005. And this too, fiber, pulled from sable palms, twisted, plied, and knotted with diligence and care to craft one of the most essential tools of the time of the Calusa, a net. Intrigued by the finds, in 2017, archaeologists from the University of Georgia, University of Florida, and Flagler College welcomed the opportunity to return for a controlled, although again, unfortunately brief, excavation adjacent to the first area and dug to the same depth. Cord and knots from both projects were meticulously conserved and assembled to give shape to a net left on the shore more than 1,000 years before our time. The heavy top cord used for wrapping wooden float pegs, carefully tied knots, ideally sized holes made with specific size net gauges for catching the desired fish, and ponderous arc shells acting as weights along the net bottom. His net. her traditions, our shared estuary. Archaeological research and historic documents inform us that when the net was left ashore, the Calusa were engineering massive towns, traveling widely across Florida's watery landscapes and trading with other Florida Indians and with people of towns and cultures thousands of miles. The myth of Spanish conquistadors of the 1500s discovering a land populated by inferior people has been thoroughly debunked. Archaeological deposits with extraordinary preservation of organic materials are still safely buried underneath Pineland's surface. And one thing is clear: discovering our past is a way of holding on to the things we love, the things we are, the things we never want to lose. Thank you.
I could just listen to Cindy hours on end. It's always illuminating, and she brings so much wisdom to her talks. So thank you very much for that, Cindy. And we have, we owe a debt to our indigenous neighbors and friends. There's a Calusa replica mask there in the silent auction table that you should take a look at. It's quite an amazing original work of art. And we have a model canoe carved by a friend of mine, Pedro Zapata, who's a member of the Seminole tribe of Florida. And for the last one he brought and exhibited a 6-foot canoe, dugout canoe. This time he carved a model for us just last week for us, carved it, cut down a cypress, carved it, all in about 2 weeks just for us tonight. So it's there if you want to take a look at that. So our next guest tonight is a friend of ours who was on our board, a legend in town, and we had such a good time because during our board meetings, he would always wax kind of humorous and had anecdotes to spare. So we're kind of sorry that we lost him from our board, but we're happy to share it with you tonight. Mr. Wayne Daltrey.
Can you hear me with this?
Yeah.
Okay, whoever's bidding against us in the Dracula coins, you're going down. Now, John Gasai and I used to do a stand-up together. He'd talk science, I'd talk planning and history. So tonight he decided to talk about planning and history. So I'm going to tell you how to milk a grass cart, all right? So first you have to grab it right below the gills. All right, so there we go. Now I'm going to talk about, good thing I brought notes. Let's see. Talk about, let's see. I want nothing, I want nothing. He took in yesterday. I did bring something to wet my whistle because I'm getting cold, so if I suddenly stop and chug something, it's not because I'm alcoholic yet. Okay, I want to talk about a fabled land. A land where the water was pure blue, where the prairies of grass were untouched, except maybe by occasional cow. I'm going to talk about where the grass beds were so thick that you couldn't walk more than 3 feet in the water without falling face first. I'm talking about a fabled land known as Lee County in 1970. Lee County in 1970's population was 100,000 people. 1950 it was 20,000. But you know, there was plenty to Lee County. There's lots of Lee County. We could all enjoy Lee County with 100,000 people. sadly have been sold lot by lot through platted land subdivisions, so that the population is going to total 1.5 million. $1.5 million. County was 800 square miles. Now, we're not 1.5 million yet. Those lots were platted and sold in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And we're not 1.5 million yet. I mean, how far in advance do you have to be a huckster to sell land for populations not yet arrived? I mean, great-great-grandchildren are inheriting lots from the original purchasers. Lee County did not know how to say no to a developer. And yet, the waters are blue. The grass beds were that thick. The interior had palmetto wetlands, piney flatwoods that maybe cows saw, because surely not too many tractors have been out there. And the people in Lee County, we got to 200,000, said, you know, there's a word in the dictionary we gotta learn. We gotta learn what it means, and we have to learn how to use it. And the word is no. Well, 1970 was a breakthrough year. NEPA had been passed the year before. We're getting Clean Air Acts, Clean Water Acts, all these wonderful acts are happening at the federal level. Florida said, you know, we've been having a lot of people, all right? There we go. We're going to have some laws too. We're going to have a special study committee, and it's going to sit and think, and when it got done, it recommended passing 5 laws. The State Planning Act, State Coastal Management Act, State Water Management Act, the State Land and Water Management Act, and the State Comprehensive Planning Act for the local governments, by the local governments. That's what said we needed. Yeah. That will create bureaucracies and fund them very poorly and tell them they got to go do this themselves. Well, who's going to go to work for a group like that? Local governments, maybe Lee County had 3 or 4 planners. It's hard to tell. They were passing through the Planning Commission minutes so fast. Well, we fired another one today. Fort Myers didn't have a planner. Cape Coral didn't have a planner. Anyone who was in Cape Coral back then knew that Cape Coral didn't have a planner. It had a planner, but not a planner. And every county up and down the east and west had the same. Yes, there's a city to the west, city to the west. Cape Coral had formed because it didn't want to be controlled by the county. Sanibel formed because it didn't want to be all high rises. In Fort Myers, that's what we had in Lee County, Lee County government. And they said, you know, we got to coordinate with our neighbors. We got to create a regional planning council. And that's the group that the county commissioners, city council people formed. And they would sit together in a room and they'd have an executive director and they'd say, let's plan. And they all went, what's planning? Mr. Executive Director, what's planning? He says, well, he was a Miami developer. He'd been brought over because they knew he wasn't going to be too rough on people. And that Miami developer had also been the city manager of South Miami. And what they didn't know was, on the drive over, somehow, as he's coming over in dawn, the sun rose in the west and landed in his eyes, and he had a Damascene experience. His name was Roland Eastwood, and he became one of the heroes of this area. Because Roland Eastwood said, well, I need to hire some planners. And we'll go hire a few planners. We got a few bucks, they got to be cheap. And so what do you know when you get cheap, you know, the old joke was, what do you get when you have peanuts, you get monkeys. So what he paid was peanuts, but what he got was young men. Sorry, girls, it's the way it was, turned out that way. He'd hired some young women, but they had more sense. Young men, because one, they're bromeliads, they can live on like airplanes, right? If they're not married, they can live on like their airplanes. And two, they have a very high threshold of pain. And basically, you know, they think they're unbreakable, so they'll try anything once or twice. So, the citizens wanted the word no. County commissions kind of thought, well, I looked it up in the dictionary. No means not now. That's the Southwest Florida addendum. So, but they said, well, we'll hear the word. So, the Regional Planning Council had the job of reviewing the big developments because already all the plats that had taken place, they platted out beyond the coastline. I mean, Florida's big reform in the 60s was a bulkhead line. You could only fill out 200 feet beyond the shoreline. Only 200 feet. I guess that was to make sure the traffic could still get to Mexico in the Gulf of Mexico. So, all right, so we reviewed the big development there because I was one of those young men. And we did a great job. In came the first project. It was another plat land subdivision. It wasn't in Lee County. How that happened, I don't know. It wasn't in Lee County. We said why this was such a bad idea, why it was so silly. We had so many lots. We provided a report to the Regional Planning Council. They voted 5-6 to fire all of us. Well, we were still there, folks. It was 5-6. We were one ahead. The next project came in was a project called the Estuaries. Now, John already touched on the estuaries, but he didn't touch the backstory. He didn't know the backstory. Those newspaper clippings probably don't have the backstory. When the estuaries came in, their planners came in with green leather books printed in gold on the cover. They stood 5 foot high. I mean, the bindings cost more than what we got paid at the Regional Planning Council. But we did something that never expected. We read them. And they were holler, as we used to say. Yeah, they said, we're going to build this project and all the roads will work perfectly. In fact, we'll have space for more development. And, there'll never be another hurricane again. And swamps are meant to be drained. And there ain't no bad runoff going to go in Estero Bay, even though we're going to make sure all drains flow that way. I'm exaggerating just a little bit. And everybody who lives here won't have children, so there'll be no impact on the schools. And they're all going to be in tall towers, so you don't have to worry about too much. We just need to fill those 2,000 acres. Life will be good. So we, as the bright young men that we were, sat down and wrote why this was so silly. And he came with a report and said why it was so silly. We had to roll eastward. And he proceeded to ream us up one side and down the other. He said he didn't care about our opinions or snotty little comments. He wanted clear analysis of facts and figures of whether or not this is going to be good for the community. So we had to go back and be professional. Go figure. And we worked late nights. Marty can attest to that. And early morning. We came in on weekends and we took a look at the traffic. And we looked at other areas' traffic. And we got all the traffic books and we can tell you about the traffic. We could tell you about how hard it was going to be to evacuate that site in the event of a hurricane because Hurricane Donna came through and all that area was underwater. And Hurricane Donna came through again with 73,000 people there. That was going to be 73,000 people heading for the hills, but we ain't got no hills. They would say they could stay in the buildings. And we said when your water's up to 6 feet at the base of the building, you think something's not going to work in the building, like the power. So, yeah. And then we also talked about the environment. And we got the environmental scientists from all over the world we can lay our hands on. We said if you took out the black mangroves, that was going to kill the Estero Bay. State's first aquatic preserve. We went chapter and verse on why it was going to happen. But then we said, look, they don't want us to say why no, just tell them, we also have to tell them what you have to do to say yes. So we said, to say yes, you got to get out of that 2,000 acres. You got to cram those people closer together, all 73,000 of them, which, by the way, still is the density of Baltimore. And we were going to say you could do that, but the tax base still isn't going to come into play for 5 or 7 years, so you're going to need an impact fee. That's where it started, folks, for roads. We're going to need to do all those things. So that's how I could get a yes. We took that to Roland Eastwood, and he read it, and he went to that county council of 18 hard-bitten politicians, and he said, we're going to have to tell this developer no. Why is that? He says, I can't tell these young men they can't be right. And so they vote 13-1 to say no to the developer. From there, it went to the county commission. County commission bled through the pores, but the people were there saying we don't want it. 3-2. They sent the governor's cabinet. Governor's cabinet said 7-0. We ain't want it. I don't care what the district court said. State Supreme Court said, you're right. You don't have to plan to pollute. It went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, asked Bob Graham versus the estuaries, and they said, you don't have to plan to pollute, and you don't have to plan to pollute, and you don't have to plan to pollute. And folks, that's been the basic environmental doctrine of land planning ever since in these United States. And it's true. You don't have to plan to pollute. And why is that such an important thing to say? Because it took one man to put the skids on a cocky bunch of young men to make sure we came up with a report that could make the U.S. Supreme Court that could stand as the land's law for the environment in these United States. And that man was Roland Eastwood. And I was one of those young men. And I will say, thank you, Roland. You made me a better citizen. I'm being visited by the ghost of 6 packs past. I didn't mean it. I was there when he died, but I didn't mean it to be so bad. But we're also having coming the spirit of giving. Here is the spirit of giving to say, folks, we still have the bids open on all those items over there, so get those bids in.
So you folks may be wondering what the heck is going on. This gentleman over here, Steve Silas, is wearing something called Can Man. It was created by Zan Lombardo from, I was told, 2,400 cans, all of them drunk by her neighbor. And there's a lot of beer in that suit. It weighs 40 pounds, and this was part of a fashion show that was here November 1st, all created from recycled items. And the other young lady that we have with us, Inda Schulberg, my wife, is is modeling. This was all made from recycled fabric as well. This is just like packing material that was then hand painted. And so we decided to grace you with 2 elements, 2 of the items that were in the show on the 1st of November. So thank you, Inda, for modeling that. Thank you, Steve, for Can Man. And they will be with you in the lobby so you can fool around with them. I don't think you can get any drink out of this. These are spent. But there's plenty of libation at the bar, so we're going to take a 20-minute intermission. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 20 minutes. Folks, we have a real treat in store. Can you hear me? I think the mic needs to be a little louder. We have a real treat in store for you folks. So I'm going to ask you to regain your seats. I don't know if you know about our next speaker. She was a county commissioner for 20 years. She has received more environmental awards than anyone I know. She happens to be Janet Reno's little sister, She's up against it right now. She's got a lawsuit filed against her where she has a $4.4 million judgment against her. So she's become kind of a martyr, a hero in the cause of environmental activism. But she's not going to talk about that lawsuit tonight. If you want to know about it, you can read Amy Bennett Williams' article, or you can read Roger Williams' article, or the New York Times article. She's really become an emblem of First Amendment rights issue. Howard Simon can expound on that. We did a radio program last week with Maggie. So, folks, I'm just so honored to have Maggie with us tonight. I first met her a couple of years ago, just after taking over as executive director of Calusa Waterkeeper, and we did a screening of the movie Toxic Puzzle, which I highly recommend, over in Stewart. And that's when I met Maggie, and I was immediately impressed by her ironclad wit and intelligence and her fierce activism. So, ladies and gentlemen, Maggie Hercello.
Thank you. I was born in Miami in 1940, but I spent an awful lot of time on summer weekends in the late 1940s being bitten to death by sandflies camping out on Marco, so it's nice to be home. I'd also like to thank Wayne and this county for the fact that the estuaries case made it possible for all of us in Florida to save wetlands. It was more important than the Clean Water Act. It was more important than anything else. We have the strongest wetland rules in the state that we adopted in 1981 because of the estuaries case. But that's all serious. I want to talk to you about a historic wine bottle. I'm convinced that this wine bottle has been uncorked and drunk in a place that no wine bottle has ever been uncorked before. This wine bottle traveled across the Everglades with my little brother Mark and I in 1988. You want to take a picture of this? Mark had something etched on it and gave it to me as a Christmas present the following year. It says, April 1988, Ingram Highway to Shark Valley Tower, because it was there. It was all Janny's fault. Janny is my big sister, Janet Reno. She read the article about the Ox Lady. The Ox Lady was the widow McCain, came to Florida after her husband was hung for murder in Georgia, and lived in Homestead area, and came over to visit her sister, Big Six, in Chokoloskee, by driving a team of 2 scraggly oxen with 2 scraggly dogs right across the Everglades in the dry springtime. Janny figured that if the Ox Lady could do it, we could do it. She did the planning. There were going to be 5 of us that went originally. Janny went off to make a speech to some bar association. 2 of the others dropped out, and that left my brother Mark and I. We are either low-tech or cheap in my family. We had one old compass, a 20-year-old USGS map, a pot of frozen beef stew, a small burner, a couple of sleeping bags, and the wine. And we set out on a sparkling spring, April 30th. It was about to be the driest April in the history of Florida. And of course we didn't bring a tent. Who would need a tent? And it was a beautiful day. We went from where the Flamingo Road goes down before you get to Paheoki, when you get to the end of the pine woods there. You set out and you are beginning to be in Shark Valley because you first go through the Pinnacle Rock. Pinnacle Rock is mean. It's that eroded limestone with little potholes amongst it, and you want to walk over it very carefully because you do not want to fall on it with a knapsack on your back. The interesting thing was, we were out past the edge of the Everglades, and there wasn't any water anywhere. There were some flowers and potholes at the Pinnacle Rock, but no water anywhere. But we walked on till we got to the sawgrass. Now, sawgrass is not easy going. My little brother Mark was bigger and stronger and taller than me. If you want to walk through sawgrass, walk behind Mark. If you can't find Mark, an elephant or a small bulldozer would help. But going through sawgrass is not that easy. But even when we got to the sawgrass, there was no water. We were now in the part of the USGS map that was painted all blue. It said we were in Shark Valley Slough, and to be a river. And to being a river, you could kick up dust and marl between the sawgrass. We ran out of water. We didn't expect to run out of water. We did bring some iodine tablets or something like that along. And we had to dig for water in the middle of the Everglades. It was Gunga Den water. It was crawling and it stunk. But of all the drinks I've drunk, I'm grateful to one from Gunga Den. We were pretty thirsty at that time. It did not stink, but it was crawling with the gray marl that we had dug it out of. We went on from the Pinnacle Rock, getting into the sawgrass, and walked and walked and walked. There were birds flying overhead, but all the wildlife was all looking for wherever the water was. It wasn't around us. We kept walking, kept kicking up dust, and later in the day, we found a nice big tree island. Now, the beautiful thing about the Everglades is, there's no Everglades, there's just sky. There's all this sky. The little white clouds that are floating down the slough and the blue sea up above, and then the tree islands, which look like long ships sailing down through the sawgrass. And we could see all that, but we couldn't see any water. We came to a little islet. It didn't have any buzzards in it, like the first one we'd looked at. And it had a couple of willow trees and some wax myrtle. And we had hot beef stew. And we drank the wine. And we unrolled our sleeping bags under blazing stars. And I think it was less than an hour before we were in the most dramatic thunderstorm I have ever slept in my life. There was light everywhere. There was sheet lightning all around the edge of the sky. There were crashing thunderbolts overhead. And there was torrential rain. We were all wet. But when you're tired enough, you go back to sleep. And when we woke up the next morning, it was a beautiful world and a blue sky, and the whole dry Everglades had raised up about 8 inches all around us. So now we were slogging through it instead of kicking dust in it. We headed out, and one of the things you learn as the sawgrass gets thicker is you will hear these terrible stories about running through the Everglades and being torn to ribbons by the sawgrass. The trick is don't push. The blade is only sharp in one direction. If you go this way, you cut your fingers off. But if you happen to have your feet stuck in shoe-eating marl, you can pull on sawgrass and actually stabilize yourself. Well, it's not just the sawgrass. I think the tree islands in their own way are worse. They're very tempting. Nice trees, sailing along through the river of grass. They are surrounded by thorny vines, at least 3 or 4 different kinds of thorny vines. And behind the thorny vines are stunted trees that are too low to crawl under and too rubbery and too high to crawl over. It is best to walk around tree islands. That leaves you a little confused as to where you are, because it's very difficult with an old compass and an old USGS map to keep a straight walking course when you're going around tree islands all the time. But we were making our way through the sawgrass, me cheating because I was behind Mark, when we came on a heavily beaten track in sawgrass. The fact that it looked like it had been beaten down something considerably larger than us, we decided we'd follow it. And we followed it till the path led into a cypress head, as opposed to a tree island. And we came in very quietly and peeked in. The trees were full of nesting birds, just alive with birds. The water, in what had been the only deep place in the Everglades just a day before, was roiling with fish. And I think every alligator for miles around had come there and found a place where there were birds to eat, fish to eat, and some water left in the Everglades. We backed quietly but quickly away. And we set off, well, we didn't really have any idea where we were. But we knew we'd been going northish, and we'd been sort of moving with the flow of the tree islands in the water, opposite the water, along the long length of the tree islands. And late in the afternoon, we spotted the Shark Valley Tower. And my brother Mark pointed out that there was a full moon that night. And if we kept walking, we could make it there in maybe just 2 or 3 hours. I pointed out that there was no way in the world I was going to swim through that boat full of alligators around the tower in the moonlight. So we started looking for another hammock to camp in. And we found a really handsome hammock. No civilization at all, no beer cans, no buggy tracks, no airboat ride tracks, nothing. No path except one that an armadillo or a raccoon could get in. And we crawled in through the vines. And when we got inside, there was a clearing and a cathedral of huge old gumbo limbo and ficus and oak trees. And in the middle of it was a big black iron pot. And in one of the ficus trees, there was a cast iron frying pan that had been left in the crotch of a tree and had grown around it so only the handle was sticking out. And up in the top of the tree was a barred owl. And while we went to sleep on our very wet sleeping bags, and the barred owl went, "Who cooks, who cooks, who cooks for you?" It was ghostly, but it was also magic. We woke up the next morning to a glorious spring day. We walked to the tower, which was easy to see by then. I found a log I could crawl over, so I didn't have to swim through the alligators. And the first tram of the day had come out to the tower. It had 6 Texas bird watchers and a ranger. The bird watchers backed off from us as far as they could get. The ranger stood at the ground. Mark pulled out his backcountry pass and went to show it to the ranger. Now remember, the backcountry pass had 5 people on it. It had me, it had Mark, it had Janny, it had my niece Hunter Reno, it had Jim Reagan. And the ranger looked at it and he said sternly, "What have you done with the others?" We convinced him that we had not boiled them in the iron pot. And he gave us a ride back to the Tamiami Trail. The most amazing thing about the Everglades is the sky and the emptiness. You can feel like you're setting a foot where no foot ever got set before, where no wine bottle got uncorked, where nobody had ever been. The Miccosukis lived there, hunted there, crossed it. The Spanish Indians and the Calusas crossed the Everglades. But they didn't overpopulate it, they didn't walk all over it. And I'm sure that somewhere in our walk, we walked somewhere no one had ever walked before. We got home to all the comforts of home. Warm showers, dry clothes, food and drink, soft bed, people who love you. And it didn't feel quite right. Because all that emptiness and all that sky is very soothing. And it took us at least 2 days to get used to the crowdedness and the busyness of civilization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How about that? Thank you all, Matt. So our next guest tonight is a dear friend of mine down south, Naples Way. And Paul is a raconteur, a painter, a historian, and just a lovely individual. So please, and some of you've seen his artwork. It's on display at the The Calusa mural down in Marco Island is Paul's. His artwork's at the Naples Beach Hotel, and some of it he's kindly loaned us some artwork for our silent auction. So I would like to invite Paul up. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul up to...
Oh, terrific. Well, bear with me. I'm not a tech person, but let me begin. I only have a few minutes here, so here we have the first painting I ever did in Florida. And when I graduated from art school in '73, in June, 2 weeks after that, I signed on as a deckhand in a research vessel at a Woods Hole, Mass. It was wonderful and on the Cape, but it started getting gray and cold and brown, and we were sent to Florida. And that's when things got interesting. It was pulling and pitching all the way down, but when we hit the Gulf Stream, we caught a beautiful dolphin. And when we were opposite Cape Canaveral, a rocket went off. And as we entered the Fort Pierce Inlet, it became magic. It was backlit, there was gliding pelicans, it was not rocking and rolling, it was warm, it was colorful, it was mullet were jumping, dolphins were rolling, and we tied up at the citrus dock, the Indian River citrus dock, and when the trustees that night welcomed us, someone asked who did the painting in the galley. I was introduced to this gal, and she took me after the event down the docks across the field to the home and studio of Beanie Backus, my first Florida home. The Dean of Florida Landscape Painting was my first visit in Florida, which was an unbelievable thing, and we became very good friends, and he was a dear mentor. Here's a little river road in Fort Pierce, and here we have a little marina going down the Indian River. I wanted to concentrate on the Indian River Lagoon and the Calusa waterfront areas. So here we move a little north to Vero Beach. This is the Jungle Trail, a little grow house on the Jungle Trail there, and you could buy citrus while cruising down the Indian River, and it was just a very sweet waterfront. And moving away a little bit from the waterfront, the kind of characters that I was fortunate to meet were people, well, this was Waldo Sexton's barn out at his ranch. His grandson, Sean, and I are friends. He's a rancher, an artist, and a poet, and he had me out there for a couple of days. And his grandfather was famous for taking old architectural objects, incorporating them in whimsical and classical ways, but he had a great place out here. Here's a fish house up in Sebastian, but it was really great to see just a very practical waterfront. And here we have the Calusa. I had finally a car that I could leave Naples with, and I found myself in LaBelle. And I was with my now wife Eileen, and I'd heard about two sisters living on an old steam launch. I'd read about it years before, and this was in '83. I finally found it, this was J.P. Morgan's Hershoff launch that he took from Glen Cove to Wall Street every morning. He got tired of this steam, gave it to his captain. The captain took it to Florida, and it was taken over by an engineer of Tesla, which seems to be a pretty good trick. And his daughters were living there and lived there for many years. And that's us meeting the daughters on the Navette in LaBelle in '83. So as we when the shuttle was no longer, I thought I'd tie in our area with the space age, and so I thought I remember hearing how the swing bridge in Alva was damaged in the 60s by parts I thought that were from the launch, early shuttle, and I had contacted through the gallery the director of the Alva Museum, asking for a photo of the old swing bridge, if there was a good one. She said, "I'll send you that photo, but I want to send you a book." She wanted me to know, if I wanted to know anything about Alva, I had to know about Captain Nelson. So I got the story of Captain Nelson, which was a great story. And I throw that out because the waterfront culture, the characters, the people. I'm jumping north now to the Mayaca River, a swimming hole here. Just as you can imagine, off and away when you could swim we could swim in the river easily. When the net ban was happening, that was in '95. I determined before that happens, I should paint the fishingest town in Florida, which was Cortez, Florida. And so this was the last week of the net ban up in Cortez. That's behind Anna Maria Island, Bradenton, and Sarasota Bay. And in '77, I was invited out to Usepa Island in Pine Island Sound. This is when the Collier Inn was inhabited by raccoons. So it was just the backside of the place, but it was like a movie set, just kind of lost in time, forgotten in time. They had just discovered the Pink Path. And here's a landscape view before the houses, of course, way back when. This is back in the 70s, looking across to Pineland and the Randolph Research places across the way there. I didn't put houses there. I wanted to keep it romantic. I swapped a painting for one of the early powers that be in early Usepa, the Hagers. In fact, Edna Hager was of an old Fort Myers family, and he was. They've established quite a legacy out there in Usepa. We arrived in '77, the same year, but this is looking off his deck at some of the old cisterns. And across the way from Usepa is Cabbage Key, this was owned at one time by Mary Robert Reinhardt, one of the earlier mystery writers, published 20 years before Agatha Christie's, and she and her brother owned this place. And the legacy was the dollar bills that were tacked on the walls, which you might remember. And I love that after 9/11, they gathered the dollar bills for the first time and sent it for the firemen. I thought that was nice. And then I got invited up to, the Hagers introduced me to Byron and Mary Sharp, who owned the old Gasparilla Inn, so I got a really nice entree into the Boca Grande. This is the old Pink Pony, and this is the golf course. That's the old clubhouse that was the clubhouse that was built out in Usepa by Collier, and they moved it over. And of course, the legendary Whiddens Marina. It's now a wonderful yet funky old museum. Back in the day, before GPS, the Loran system had a Loran point here at the Whiddens. And it was a wonderful, they probably, or maybe not, still have the Sunday afternoon where the shrimper backs in and you can buy shrimp right there. A wonderful little spot in Boca Grande. And of course the legendary Boca Grande Pass, the lighthouse, and the museum there. This, of course, was famous for where all the phosphate, which is a lot of the issue that we have with the water. But that was the big loading docks for the phosphate, but it's better known now for the tarpon. I guess that's how Ponce de Leon came in to Punta Rasa. Here's a painting of South Sea plantation, I can't remember the name of this intercoastal tour boat, but anyway, South Seas plantation, and here we have Blind Pass. And every 3 or 4 years I go up, and the whole thing has changed. That's what keeps the paintings new and fresh. And this is kind of a sketch, but I just wanted to keep a variety of the waterfront. And of course, the old places. This is the old schoolhouse that was became the playhouse. I guess it's not there anymore. And of course, the lighthouse on the south side of Sanibel. And I love that it was this point where Ponce de Leon first saw Sanibel and named it after his patron, Queen Isabella. And it looks like they're catching fish, so the bounty was assured back then. This is back in the day of sunfish at a causeway that takes you out to Sanibel. So it was just a little. I just pulled over, did a quick sketch of the lined up sailboats. It was a while back, but this is Mullet Creek. Okay, right, a favorite watering hole. I don't know, is it still there like that? Oh, great news. No, done? Okay, I didn't. Well, here's the back side of it. I wasn't sure how long it was going to last. I'm glad it's okay. And when they were redoing the bridge for the Estero River, I did this painting of the canoe rental. And it's great to see these old exotic, trees from back in the Crescent days, the bamboos and the palms. And here's the Grove House. The Estero River is back there. This is the Grove House. Mamet, who had the fruit stand. That was his place, yeah. And that looks pretty boarded up now, but they were bountiful back in the day. And here's looking on the other side of the bridge at the Crushins, the old Washingtonian palms. Here's the bamboo landing. New Jerusalem, the old homestead, quite a spot. And here we are at the Imperial River. This was an old tour boat. These are the fishing cabins that were there. They're now moved over to the park area as little galleries. There's the old 41 and the wall of the Wonder Gardens. And you know how certain neighborhoods have fires where all the old timers get together and the youngins. There was a great old fire gathering spot over here, kind of a legendary spot for the locals. This is Weeks Marina, and the Weeks have been trying, and the discussions of trying how could we have this next phase, this next chapter for Weeks have people access, and how can it be open to have boat access for the community, and it's still being negotiated, I guess. And here's the Weeks fish camp, or fish house, that is, back when there was a couple of mullet skiffs. And the beloved Dogs Beach. And then New Pass from there. And then here's Shangri-La, and here's Oak Creek that gurgles up on the property, and a wonderful story. I guess they're open for dinner, their gourmet cuisine. Here's the other side of the old 41 of Oak Creek, nice old spot. And here we have This is Barefoot Beach looking over to Wiggins Pass, which is a state park. I've always maintained it's the nicest beach you can go to without a boat in the area, because you got to walk down to the pass here. And every year the storms do a different thing. I did a big series when the palms were at the end. There was the most romantic look of the place. It's a little different every year, not quite that romantic anymore. And this is a painting of Naples at the old Tin City Marina. Now, early on in Naples, there was just south of Marco, there was a 5-mile across, 30-mile long bed of ocean clams, and the clamming industry was quite impressive and productive. There was 3 canneries, 2 in Marco, there was 1 here at the marina, and there was other waterfront marina stuff going on, sail loft, boat building, and this is part of the stone crab fleet right here. This is Kelly's Fish House. And when they redid the place to turn it into Tin City from the working marina, I had an art show back in '77, and this old timer came up to me and said, "You, Paul?" "Yeah." "Well, I was your age. My daddy took me to the greatest fight of the century." "Oh, and which one was that?" "The Dempsey-Furco fight." "Really?" He said, "My father was a sports writer for a New York paper, and no sooner did we sit down than this unknown Argentinian knocked Dempsey, who had never been knocked down, out of the ring. And everybody tried to get him back into the ring to see what Dempsey was going to do to this guy, and he knocked him out in a round and a half or so. Anyway, he wanted me to paint a copy of the Bellows version of the incident where Dempsey was knocked out of the ring. I did it. I had the story. Then we went to this health place, Hippocrates, over in West Palm. I meet this guy in his 80s. He said, "Just call me the professor." "Professor of what?" He said, "Boxing." I said, "Really? How come?" He said, "Because I was at all the great fights. I knew everybody. They used me for documentaries." I said, "Well, I got one fight story." I told him about that I had a story. He said, "Well, come over for tea." He said, "I just got a Christmas card from Max Schmeling." I said, "Max Schmeling? This is 1999. And I said, he's the guy that knocked out Joe Louis, right?" He goes, "Yeah, very good." "Well, he's a dear friend of mine." "You're kidding." Anyway, he tells me the story of when Schmeling beat Louis. He was Hitler's darling, and in the box at the Olympics, the 36 Olympics, he started going nuts, says Schmeling to the professor. He started going nuts when Owen started winning all these awards, these medals. Anyway, he started backing away from what this Hitler was about, but here is Dempsey. All he could do was refight Louis. He did in '38. Louis won. Schmeling was a dear friend of Louis, and paid for his funeral. There's a movie about Louis and Max just recently. Anyway, you remember there was a Olympic art gallery on the river here? There was a memorabilia display event in the Naples hotel, and I was invited by an old Olympian, and the guest speaker was the daughter and the granddaughter of Jesse Owens. So I got to tell them that story, and they were so appreciative to hear that. Anyway, I just wanted to tie that into the waterfront chatter, culture, and some paintings. So thanks very much.
Wow. It's amazing when you hear so much history and you get to look at beautiful pictures at the same time. And I'm a history buff, so seeing it unfold like that is just a delight. Our next guest speaker is a local legend. Well, his family settled in Sanibel, I believe in 1895. So many of you know Ralph, and he graced us with his presence last year for this event. So we would like to welcome him back. Ladies and gentlemen, Ralph Woodring.
Thank you all. Good to see you here, all you young people. It's been said that I'm a legend in my own mind. Probably true. Anyway, that was a hell of a travel through history here with all those different folks. Really, really great. The older you get, the more you appreciate what it used to be and how it used to be, how great it used to be. Let's put it like that. I hate to break that up, but here's the deal. Recently, we have had sad times with the red tide and all the jazz nonsense that goes with it, for the newspapers and whispers about how bad it is, and how bad it could be, and how bad it's going to be, whatever. Anyway, just recently, talking to a number of folks, I've come up with some interesting and sad, in a way, information, particularly due to the fact that they are doing a hell of a lot of spraying on the hyacinths, and the chemicals obviously are not doing any good for the water, which is part of the Calusa situation that is really, really sad. On top of this, I just found out that they're doing the same thing down in Naples. All the canals down there, all the waterways are being sprayed down there also. Bad news. Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has said they're going to try to do something about this, or curtailing some of the spraying, and they're making the stuff not as potent as it has been. But still, the problem is that they're still spraying, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be any end to it in the near future as far as we can see. So, talking to some other folks, they're telling me that all the bass fishermen, all the freshwater bass fishermen in South Florida are so damn livid that the one guy in particular said to me, "I'm surprised somebody hasn't been shot." No joke now, this is serious business. These guys know, because they're out there all the time fishing the tournaments and whatever, and the spray boats come right by them, spray the hyacinths right alongside of them practically, and then a day or two, 3 days later, they're set up with the dead hyacinths. And it's not good for the water, it's not good for the fish. The bottom line is, isn't there some better way? Some way, somehow, that we get rid of the hyacinths and do not have the chemicals. Well, recently, studying some of the nonsense that's going on Sanibel, which is my home, and I'll say this before we go any farther. The Calusa River flows right out past Calusa, and before the Causeway Bridge, it just split part way and went up mostly out into the Gulf. But when the Causeway Bridge came in, that river water hits the biggest part of the Causeway Bridge, and it comes right down on Woodring Point, the mouth of Calusa, the mouth of Tarpon Bay, which is obviously where I live. And so it is damn important to me that we do the best we can by the river and also by the water every way we can. And that's not what's happening now. In any stretch of imagination, we know that there's a lot of money being thrown at it, but I challenge anyone here tonight to tell me that you have seen or heard someone tell you straight out what they know is the best way to stop the red tide and to make the water clear and good and clean again. It ain't happening. We got lots of money, lots of talk, lots of politicians, all the way to the United States Senate, whatever, but no one can tell you that they know the reason and the way that we can solve the red tide problem so that money thrown at it is not going to solve it. Anyway, back to Sanibel has a program that they've had in place for about 10 years to do with the checking of the golf courses. Every year they do a statistic with the golf courses, 3 of them, to find out how they're faring as far as with their fertilizer that they're putting on the golf course, and any other thing that they can do to keep the nutrients out of the water around the island. Actually, no matter what happens, if you put some kind of nutrients in the very middle of the island, one way or the other, through the streams or the Sanibel rivers, they call it, whatever, it's all going to wind up back down in the bay, in the Gulf, one way or another. So they've got a program going now that they check the golf courses every year, and they figure out how good they're doing as far as not putting too much fertilizer out, and what they're doing year after year to try to do better things every year. So far, most of them got pretty good points, which is the way they do it. So obviously there is a situation there that bragging on Sanibel, that's home, but nevertheless they're trying to do something to make things better so that we don't get the nutrients just dumped in statistically every time we get a rain, that stuff is flowing in the wrong direction some way, somehow. So the other thing that I found out is that they have got the golf courses to try to take care of the hyacinths that are in their canals over there also. They've got a machine, or they rent a company, hired a company that has a machine that goes in and picks up the hyacinths and takes them out. And then I'm not sure what happens to them. I haven't figured out or found that out yet. But my point is, it seemed to me that in the Lake Okeechobee and up and down the Calusa River, some way, somehow, with all this money that's flowing, they could come up with a way to get the hyacinths out of the river, out of the lake, and do something with them that's good for the country, whether they make fertilizer out of it. They're talking about making fuel out of some of the nutrients and stuff that's going on, so maybe they can make some gasoline out of this stuff. Some way, somehow, it's got to be something better than spraying it and letting it go to the bottom, which I guarantee you is not good for the lake. The water is not as pristine as it used to be. If the hyacinths do a good job, which they do, of cleaning out the nutrients in the water, but you can't have the hyacinths because of, just like you can't have a yard with rocks in it, you got to have a grass lawn. Same thing with the hyacinths. They've got to have hyacinths in the water to help clean it. But to do something with the hyacinths is the best thing, and I can figure out a way that you got to do better than what we're doing now. You know, I'm stuttering and stammering here a little bit. I don't really know what the hell I'm talking about, other than it's got to be better than it is now. Absolutely. And it's probably the best thing to do. We could hire one of them bass men to go out and shoot somebody. Maybe that'd help a little bit. I don't know. One other thing I'll tell you before I get off of here, going back through history, the Captain Peter Nelson was the man up in Alva that started Alva and did all that stuff up in there. Once upon a time, he came down to Calusa area and was teaching school on Punta Blanca Island. And he taught my mom as a school teacher on Punta Blanca back before the turn of the century. Well, that's not true, because she was born in 1901, so it had to be a little later than that. But anyway, Peter Nelson was a school teacher up there, as well as many other things that he did. Also, I understand he was a red-headed man. Anybody hear that story? I got to get off here. It's getting worse instead of better. Thank you all.
We have a thing or two to learn from Ralph. The other thing that amazes me, he's holding the microphone out here. You can hear him clear as day. Very impressive. Thank you. So we're gonna bring Brendan back and Ermin and Lionel, who have the group Roots Divines, and they're gonna regale us with a little bit of music.